Reflections in Time is made possible in part by support from the UNO Alumni Association, fostering a legacy of alumni giving since 1913.
The interview series, Reflections in Time, was begun by the late Professor Paul Borghi more than 20 years ago. This new series continues Paul's work and is dedicated to his memory. My name is Jack Newton. I'm retired now, but I'm still active as a professor emeritus. I've been on the faculty of UN Omaha since 1960 and served for 20 years as Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences. I worked closely with Professor Borghi in the development of his original interview series and can think of no more fitting tribute to him than to continue this work. It's a bright day in December. The year is 2002, a couple weeks before Christmas, and I have as my guest in the studio today Professor Mary Williamson, a longtime professor in the communication department and a person who's held many other jobs at the University of Nebraska at Omaha that we'll get to talk about today, I'm sure. Mary, welcome.
Thank you, Jack.
Great to have you here with us. You're currently, I'm trying to think of a good word for it. It was semi-retired, all right?
Not quite retired.
Not quite retired,
right.
Okay.
0.20 FTE, if your audience knows. You know what it means.
FTE means full-time equivalent.
Yes.
0.20 is, what?
8 hours a week.
Right, 8 hours a week or so. But you, my guess is you work a whole lot more than 8 hours
Well,
a
sometimes
week.
yes, sometimes no.
Okay. But you've been here since 1969 or 70, somewhere around there, yeah. In the communication department, and well, as I said to begin with, you've held many jobs on this campus, and I hope we get a chance to talk to them, but it's kind of complicated, so let's put that off, because that's going to take a little explanation. Let's talk about you to begin with. I've known you for a long time, but I don't think I've ever talked with you very much about how you got started here. Well, first of all, where'd you grow up? Where do you come from?
Kansas City, Missouri. I am a Missouri Tiger fan.
Ah, great.
And I'm a graduate of the School of Journalism in Columbia, Missouri. Then after that, I got a job, and they gave me a chance to get a master's, and I went to Columbia University in New York, but not in journalism. It was health education.
Ah.
And I worked a while in Washington, worked a while in St. Louis, and then a friend that I knew in the broadcasting business started her own advertising agency here with a little account called the Nebraska Furniture Mart. And she asked me to come up and help her, and I did until for about 13 years.
So you had a long time in this business before you got into the university.
Yes.
Well, how did you get interested in journalism to begin with?
Well, I went to Baker University, which was a little Methodist college university outside of Kansas City, and my dear mother said, when you graduate, are you going to be a school teacher or a Methodist missionary? And I didn't want to do either of those, so in the middle of my junior year, I switched to the School of Journalism at Missouri. It's a 2-year school, and fortunately I had all the prerequisites except my American government, so I graduated in a year and a half.
Wow.
I was very happy with my choice of degrees, I would say.
That's a school that has a very good reputation, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And, so you had good preparation for the field.
They taught me a lot of good things.
Yeah.
Yes.
You mentioned just a moment ago some of the various things that you did. What was your first job after you graduated?
I was public relations director for the Kansas City Tuberculosis Society, and they gave me an opportunity to get a master's, paid my salary, and gave me the time off. The only place that would take me, they wanted it in health education. The only place that would take me with a journalism background was Teachers College at Columbia University in New York. So that's where I went.
That's a pretty well-known institution, too.
Dwight Eisenhower was president at the time. That let your history fans go back, checking back how long. I could tell them, but I'll let them do a little work.
Did you ever get a person-to-person interview with him in his office?
No, I didn't try, but I have his signature on my master's.
Well, that's probably worth something.
Then I was I was an editor in Washington, D.C., and my mother thought I should be nearer to Kansas City. I didn't want to live in Kansas City. I had friends in St. Louis, and I was in the broadcasting business in St. Louis, radio and television.
Doing what kind of?
Promotion, and then I helped write a couple of television applications. Those were the days, the early 50s, when the freeze was on, and 2 companies that I worked for. Since I had a master's degree, I looked good on paper, and I helped write a couple of applications for television licenses.
Wow. What station was that?
Well, it was KXOK, was the radio station. They merged, and we didn't get the full license. And then I worked for Harold Koppler of the Chase Park Plaza Hotels, and they we were writing another application. Meanwhile, my friend in Omaha was on the air, and Mrs. Rose Blumkin saw her, and she was homesick one day. That's the only reason Mrs. B would be home.
So everybody in Omaha knows that name, Rose Blumkin.
And she called her and said, "You're going to be my advertising agency." So my friend, I was between television jobs down there, so I came up to help just for sublet my apartment. Didn't want to live in Omaha. And anyway, I was supposed to be in Omaha, and worked with her in the advertising agency for 13 years until I simply burned out on retail advertising.
Well, that was certainly a tremendous experience, though, I'm sure, doing that sort of stuff.
Yes. Went back to the University of Missouri and did a dissertation on broadcasting, because at that time, our chairman, Hugh Cowden, I think maybe it was Jack Brillhart, I don't know. Anyway, they wanted broadcasting courses taught, so I wrote a dissertation on broadcasting.
Well, how did you get connected with the university here?
Well, I just applied for a job. I applied. I was ABD, and by
ABD is all
but dissertation,
right?
But I had a topic, and I applied, and so that's how I got the job. Yeah. Well, I also taught part-time at Midland at night but I was out of the advertising agency business. That's what I wanted.
Yeah. And so you started here around 1969 or something? What kind of courses were you teaching?
Well, I had to teach Speech 101. Everybody did. An intro to mass communication and things like that. Right. It was and television production and radio production, when it was far more primitive than it is now. And Paul Borghi, I knew Paul Borghi very well, a delightful, wonderful person.
Yeah, he taught speech classes.
Yes, he did. He got all the equipment from KMTV, too.
Well, that's where he had worked before.
Yes, it was. Right? I knew him before in the advertising. He was a director at KMTV.
Yeah. Now, let's see. That was at the, right, 69, 70. That was before...
No, it had changed. It was University of Nebraska, Omaha.
Yeah, it was University of Nebraska at Omaha, but I was thinking that was before speech and journalism and broadcasting merged together.
Yes, I think it was.
Form a communication department.
Yes, it was.
So you were in,
I was
at that time
in
the speech
department.
Speech communication.
I guess so, yes.
Yeah.
Where I did not belong.
Was broadcasting separate then, or was it part of speech?
Remember.
I think it was part of the speech department.
The print was all separate.
Right.
Warren Franke and some of the other print, the magazine editing, and all, print was separate some way.
Yeah. Had dramatic arts broken off at that time to become part of fine arts?
Yes.
But there was a time when it was part of speech, too.
Yes.
Yeah. So, so that's an interesting beginning.
Way back.
If I remember, you were teaching a course like speech for business or something.
Well, I think they probably still offered speech communication for business and the professions.
Yeah.
And I had all these bootstrappers in class.
Now, tell me about bootstrappers. They were, I remember them well, but not everybody was listening.
Military men who needed a degree after their rank so they could advance.
Right. And this was something Dr. Bale and General LeMay had worked out.
I think so, yes. But there were lots of them in school, and they were not used to women professors, let me put it that way.
But they were
Gently.
awfully good students. I remember that. At
They
least
were
the ones
very
in my
tough.
classes
Yes,
were. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. That was an interesting
Yes,
time.
it was.
Very interesting.
Very
time.
interesting.
So you've done lots and lots of things. What was the university like back then, back in '69 when you started out?
Jack, you're asking. I was so
Remember
busy.
back that far?
I was busy teaching and working on what I used to call the cancer in the back bedroom, which was my dissertation. And I would go I'd never been on another campus other than Missouri and Columbia, and it was very low-key.
We were much smaller back then. We didn't
Yes.
have all the buildings that we have now.
I don't think, no, we certainly didn't. I remember when the Hyper building was dedicated, and I remember, well, back there when Fine Arts was over in the, what it used to be the Chinese house over there.
Yeah.
It had a separate place too, and I would say the protests were over by then. It was still on in late '60s, but by then it was pretty quiet. It was not like it was in Columbia, Missouri in those days.
Well, now let's see. Did you get into the broadcasting end of things then right away, or
I think we waited till, well, pretty quickly. Pretty quickly. One of the faculty members had to retire or resign, and I had my dissertation, and I, taught production in this very studio.
The studio was a little bit different back then.
Well, it looks pretty much the same.
Yeah.
The cameras are a little different.
Yeah, we don't have all the used equipment that you mentioned
No, and you're not
earlier.
racking the lenses like we used to have to do. But I enjoyed teaching broadcast production and radio production too.
Yeah, you mentioned that Paul Borge got the cameras and stuff from his former employer,
Yes.
and when they bought new ones, they gave us the old ones, so we were always kind of a step behind the times here in the equipment that we had. But at least we had a studio that worked.
And some of the broadcasting students that I have had, well, we have one up in the control room right now, and have done very well in the real world. Chuck
You can
Hagel,
give him a plug. You
Chuck
can say
Hagel
Gary
didn't do
Repair
too
out
badly.
there.
He was a broadcasting major. Roseanne Shannon, Carol Schrader, Colleen Williams.
And these, of course, are all well-known names in Omaha.
Yes. Fred Peterson was not a broadcasting major, but he's done very well heading OPPD.
Right. Now you were in radio as well as television broadcasting, right?
You mean before I got the PhD?
No, I mean as far as teaching. And
I taught mass communication, and I divided the broadcast production was the course, and part of it was in TV, and then part of it was over at the radio station.
Yeah, well, what I was getting at is we've talked about the television studio here. What was the radio studio like?
Well, it was up in the upper level of the house over there, I think.
That was the old Stores mansion,
I think so,
right?
yes.
It was on the third floor.
Yes, it was, up in the top floor there.
And it was just kind of cobbled together, right?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, I remember those days. Yeah. And but it worked.
It worked.
And we got programming out and did very well.
Yes.
It's okay. You were teaching here, then you at that time were teaching full time. How many courses did you teach a semester?
As former dean knows, we taught 4 3-hour courses, and you'd say, well, this is Tuesday, so this must be issues in broadcasting, and this is Wednesday, so it must be political broadcasting, and in between were Speech 101, the one where you listen to all those speeches, and so we taught 4 3-hour courses.
Well, that's a good bit of work.
Yes, it is. I doubt well, I don't know how many 3-hour courses of people teach now, but probably not 4.
You know, when people who don't know a lot about the way a university works think of it, they think, well, gee, that's only 12 hours a week. What do you do with the rest of your time? But it's not just that. It's all of the preparation, and then you've got to, I presume these students in many of these classes, certainly the production classes, are doing things.
Yes.
And you have to be there to supervise.
Right, right. Well, I would always say, I have always said, that teaching is one of the hardest jobs that I have ever had. I've had a lot of jobs, editing, account executive, all different kinds of things. Teaching is a very hard job.
Very demanding.
Yes, it is. And then, of course, I moved into teaching advertising, creative advertising. And teaching creative advertising to uncreative people is a real challenge.
Can you teach people to be creative?
No, you can't. And they will, well, anyway. It's difficult, let's put it that way. I should say, you mentioned that I'm still working. I'm not teaching, you'll be glad to know. I'm a consultant.
No, I'm not glad to know that.
Well,
you're a very good teacher.
No, my patience has run out, let's put it that way. But I'm a consultant with Nebraska Business Development Center, which is a part of the College of Business Administration, and I have been working with them in my teaching for these many years, because we help, the NBDC helps businesses become better, and we had real businesses that I would assign a pair of students to work with. So my relationship with NBDC goes way back. And
well, let's backtrack just a second, because you've been talking about the Nebraska Business Development Center,
yes.
NBDC. Tell me what that is.
Well, it's a part of the university, part of the College of Business. We celebrated our 25th anniversary last year. They have, we have several components. We have Manufacturers Extension Partnership, which helps manufacturers throughout the state become more competitive. We have Procurement Technical Assistance, which helps people who want to do business with the government. And we have the ASBDC, that is the business centers throughout the state, who help people get started in business, who help them prepare business plans, financial projections, things of that nature. And I help people. I'm creative, I'm a writer, and so I help people who are wanting a brochure, a flyer. I work with an artist to help to develop a logo and help them name their businesses many times. So it's rewarding. It's like being sort of in the advertising agency business, but once we get them on their way, they're gone. We don't have to live with them for the rest of it. So it's been very challenging, and Bob Bernier has done a wonderful job through the years as director.
He is, yeah, he's director.
He's a state director, and as I say, we have 9 offices throughout the state.
And this is one of those one of those parts of the university that has statewide responsibility for the.
Yes.
There are a number of activities at UNO that do have that statewide responsibility,
and this is one
rather
of
than just
them.
being
Yes.
local.
Yes, indeed. So it's been a very good relationship.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
Well, it is. I mean, I enjoy working. I don't want to teach anymore, but that is too much work. But I like meeting with clients, and they're so appreciative. I'm also a volunteer at SCORE, which is the Service Corps of Retired Executives, and
I've heard about that.
I do counseling there one afternoon a month. Again, people have the same help. They need the same kind of help, and frequently I will refer them from SCORE to me at NBDC, because you can spend more time with them. And there's no charge for any of these services. And
SCORE is that agency that kind of brings the expertise and experience of retired executives to the
people who need
people who are beginning or need that help in one way or another.
The Small Business Administration, and it's out there in Old Mill, right next to the Small Business Administration.
Okay. When you were back when you were involved exclusively with the department, did you get involved in any research activities, or were you pretty exclusively teaching?
I did write a couple of articles and got them published, because you had to do that, as you well know. And but I always thought if I really had wanted to write a book, I would have written a book on Frida Hennock, who was the first woman FCC commissioner. But I got in to administration, and otherwise just didn't do it.
That would have been interesting.
Yes, it was. She was quite a character. Right. Yes.
Good.
I guess I got into campus politics then with the faculty senate.
Yeah, I was going to say we usually at the university divide things up into teaching, research, and service, and you certainly had plenty of involvement in service activities on the campus.
Well, I was vice president and president of the faculty senate, but in the community I was also vice president of one of the companies that was trying to get the cable franchise in 1980. Obviously, we did not get it. We were the ones that were sponsored by Time Incorporated.
Mm-hmm.
And as you all know, Cox has the cable system here, not Time Incorporated. Anyway. But, yeah, I was president of the Faculty Senate, as a matter of fact, just before Chancellor Weber came on board.
About what year was that?
It was 80, let's see, the cable thing was 80, 81, around in there.
Yeah,
70.
that must have been about the time that that the faculty was beginning to organize in for the AAUP.
Yeah.
And
I was never in the AAUP, so, but I think there.
But being president of the Senate at that time
didn't matter in those days.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Those were interesting times too. In a lot
Very
of ways.
interesting times.
In fact, I think it was '83 that they got the first contract with the university for this, so somewhere around there. That was, I guess, a little after your time as president.
Right. Because then I went into the chancellor's office. After my term as faculty senate president, I became the chancellor's executive assistant.
Oh, no, let's spend a little time on that, because you had, that was almost a separate career, wasn't it?
Yes. And I enjoyed it very much.
And that was from '81 until, oh, about 5 years.
About '86, yeah.
What did you do as executive assistant to the chancellor? What does that job involve?
Well, I tried to make the chancellor look good on all occasions. I think it was not stated in the job description, but I tried. It was while I was there that we had the 75th anniversary, the big celebration, and all the Enron folks were there. Remember that very well. And I just did what he asked me to do, or what needed to be done. And part of the time I was on that stint was when I became the acting dean of the College of Fine Arts, when there was some difficulty with the current dean, and the vice chancellor for academic affairs said, we need a interim dean in the College of Fine Arts. And I said, who will we get? And he goes, you. So I had no background.
Who was that dean that you replaced? I'm trying to remember back.
Murray North.
Was that Murray North? Okay.
Who brought in the piano tutor from the West Coast because he was his brother-in-law.
Yeah.
Well, anyway.
I bet you know all kinds of stories like that.
I certainly do.
Any others you want to tell us about?
Well, coming from communication where we taught 4 3-hour courses, when the faculty would turn in their workload and so forth, and I would see somebody, we'll say from the art department, who had 3 classes, 3 hours each, all at the same time. And of course, as I say, when you're not in fine arts, when you're just a dummy from journalism, what do I know? So I said, well, what do you do with how can you get 3 3-hour courses in one time? I said, do you say, put red here, and then put red and yellow here, and then put red, yellow, and green here? They were not amused. They were not amused. And one of our faculty, who was concertizing all the time, had no students. And I said, your job is to teach some students. Get some students. And we had several. We won't go into it, but it was a delightful time. I love those people over there. And actually, 2 of the chairmen wanted me to apply for the deanship. I said, no, I don't think so. Chancellor Weber said, no, I don't think so. So then I became acting university relations director. And I replaced Herb, what was his name?
Oh, I remember Herb, but I don't remember
Little short guy.
Right, yes.
So I did that until we hired a new person, and then I went back to communication and was acting chair for a while. And then I was in '86 that thanks to your good offices and Dean Trussell in business arranged this consultancy with Nebraska Business Development Center, which I have been doing ever since.
Right. I was trying. Did you overlap at all with Charlie Hine?
Oh yes, yeah, I knew Charlie.
He
Liked him
he
much.
was both executive assistant to the chancellor and director of university relations for a long time.
I don't know.
And he was also in the communication department.
He was not really happy with when the chancellor moved into those new offices, that his office was over in university relations and not next to the chancellor's anymore. And I had no part of that. That was not my doing, and you know, I got along fine with Charlie, but I think he was a little, well, as you know how delicate people are in the university, their egos and things.
But he, if I remember, he had a pretty good reputation in that job. He was,
but he was not happy with.
Yeah.
He served. Well, it wasn't Weber so much. Well, I guess it was Weber. But anyway, I don't know what.
But he was with President Roskins.
Roskins, yes.
I guess Chancellor Roskins
yes.
at the time. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good, Dr. Roskins. I liked Dr. Roskins.
Well, you've met a lot of people over the years.
Yes.
Here. We'll talk about some of those a little later.
Okay.
So you were executive assistant to the chancellor for 5 years, and right in the middle of that, you also had a couple of other jobs, like the acting dean of fine arts that you mentioned. That's a big job. You've talked about some of the difficulties, and they alone made it a big job.
It was
wonderful. You've got recruitment of new faculty, and you've got all kinds of personnel decisions, and students, and budgets, and all kinds of stuff to handle.
I'm very proud. I hired Jim Zarnicki. I hired Francis Thurber. I hired, what's his name, Ken Bales. Some of the people that I hired have done very, very well. And I'm sure I've left some out. But as I said, you know, sometimes when you're not in that particular discipline, you can be more objective and ask the questions that, and they knew, the faculty knew that I was an interim dean, so I wasn't trying to curry favor with any of them.
If I remember, you had a reputation as being pretty tough.
Mean dean. But they appreciated it, because the dean, before they never knew. Sometimes he was nice to them and give them what they want. Sometimes he wouldn't. And so
what you brought was consistency.
Yes, and honesty and openness, which is, I think, important.
Well, that's important to every dean. I can.
Yes, I know.
From personal experience.
You were a good dean, Jack.
Thank you.
I hope I was.
From what I've heard, you did a marvelous job there, and got them on the right track.
Don't ask Sid Buchanan, though.
Sid Buchanan was the sculptor. Did the metal sculpting. In fact, he's still around, I think.
Well, he's not. He's retired.
But not at the university.
No.
Right?
He had a studio off campus, and one of the things that I was assigned to do was bring him back on campus. And it's too long a story to tell, but it was. He is not one of my fans. I am not, you know, close to him. Let's put it that way. So, but we did bring him back on campus, and then eventually, as I say, it comes out all right. He had a lovely building built over there for sculpture.
That's right. When they tore down some of those old temporary buildings that were on to make the parking
Quonset
garage.
huts. Well, I brought him back into the Quonset huts, and. But I cut off his utilities down. He had a studio down on Leavenworth that we were paying for. So, and the other deans didn't want to mess with him. I didn't, you know. Otto said, let's bring him on campus.
Otto
Bauer, Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs.
Right.
Yes.
Good. So. Well, those were great times.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Tell me about this. Your time as director of university relations. What sorts of things did you get involved in there?
Well, I was trying to. We had, you know, Tim Fitzgerald, and Nancy was, I think, in university relations, and Nancy Castello now. She was. I had her in class when she was Nancy Nordoff. Nancy. Anyway, I was concerned with the catalog. We had one person in university relations had full command of the catalog, and if anything had happened to him, nobody knew where it was or whatever. And so I tried to start a deal of getting all the deans together and getting everyone to do their own section. And I said I would help rewrite part of the catalog, you know.
Sure.
Well, we hired a new university relations director before I got very far along with it, and he decided not to do it, and so it never got done. But, you know, it's just a matter of keeping your fingers on a lot of different people over there. We had, well, it's too long a story to go into, but I did get a board put up saying in and out, so we would at least know where people were, because if people would call and we don't know where they are, you know, you have probably run into that in your experience at the university, not knowing where your people are.
How big an operation was university relations? About how many people were working there?
5 or 6.
Yeah. So these were, you were responsible for all of the university public relations?
Yes, except the broadcasting had a separate budget. And what's his name? Don Peterson, I believe, was head of broadcasting. Is that right, Don Peterson? Does that sound familiar?
It's been a number of years.
Well, he had lots more people than the director of university relations had, and I did suggest that those salaries should be made equal, or the man who was overall, because all the radio and TV people, he had a much bigger staff than we had in university relations, and yet the university relations salary was much higher. I didn't get that done either, but that's right.
And then towards the end of this time, you had another acting job, acting appointment, the chair of the Department of Communication. Yes. Now, by this time, it was a communication department. We brought together in the 70s the Department of Speech Communication, Department of Journalism, and as we've talked about earlier, broadcasting was involved in that too.
Yes.
So we had these 3 disciplines really brought together in a single department.
Made good sense too.
Yeah, and now you're acting chair of that. How did that come about?
Well, how did that come about?
Well, Hugh Cowden was chair of that for a long time.
Yes, and why was I don't. Gosh, maybe we hadn't come together by then. I guess we had to.
Yeah, you did in the 70s.
I don't know how it came about, but because Bob Carlson was chairman too then.
Was he chair before or after you?
Before, I think.
Okay.
And then after too.
Okay.
So I don't know. I don't know. But
that was
down,
what, 1 year?
Yes, that's when I went back to the department and cut down to half-time. And then I cut down, and I did half-time as the chairman then. And, gee, Jack, I can't tell you. I don't know.
Well, do you remember some of the things that some of the problems you faced, or some of the more happy things you faced as a chair of the department?
It's kind of interesting, you know, when you ask people about their vacation, they always tell you the awful things that happened to them instead of the good things. And when I think of that in the department, there were some problems, let's put it that way. Every department has them, and we had our share of them. And as a matter of fact, you know, I go back there and I think, we skipped over when I was going to be terminated at the university. I had just done my PhD, and the chairman of our department, who's no longer here, without a PhD, was going to bring in somebody to teach more TV production. This was 75, 76.
Is that Don?
Yes.
Don Kneffler?
Yes. And that's when that was just before I got elected to the faculty senate, because some women at the university, we were having problems with discrimination, and women were not being hired, or they were being fired summarily, and so I went to the ombudsman, and I had the letter, you know, and they had even brought this guy in for an interview, and I won. In other words, I won't go through all this,
Sure.
but the ombudsman certainly found in my favor and convinced the chairman to cancel his letter, and from then on I went to the faculty senate and so forth and so on. So sometimes the things that I forget about it, but it was very painful at the time. Here I am, just finished and had my PhD going strong there, and I found that I'm not wanted by somebody who doesn't have a PhD.
That was one of the major issues in the department, I recall
Yes.
very well, that the question was, do you hire faculty members who've had the practical experience to teach the practical courses, or do you insist that everybody that you hire have a doctoral degree because that's the standard credential in a university? And you had both. I mean, you certainly had the marvelous experience, and at the same time, practical experience, and at the same time had the gumption to go out and get your doctoral degree.
Well, obviously I did not agree with his decision, nor did anyone else, I guess, when it got right down to it. And, you know, again, I don't want to go back and...
Right. But I was just recalling that particular issue for its historical interest, that we had a lot of trouble finding people who had both these qualifications, both the doctoral degree and the practical experience, if they were going to be teaching the applied courses.
Well, I wrote several syllabi for my dissertation, which was Commercial Broadcasting Search for Excellence. I developed courses in that, and I was moving out of the production course, but still, you know, we didn't have that many women. We didn't have that many women, period, or women PhDs in the department. I think by then Barbara Brillhart was gone, and so anyway, it was. I forgot about that. Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
It was not a pleasant time, though.
Yeah.
But everything happens for the best, I've learned.
Yeah. Well, if I remember, it was particularly in journalism, we had trouble finding people with both
I think that there's still a problem filling positions there with academicians and practitioners, and I don't know where there are a lot of adjunct faculty still around, but I guess those budgets have been cut.
Well, there was a time too when I'm trying to see if how my memory is. Maybe yours will help me a little with it. When we changed the majors that we had and did not have a emphasis on the production majors any longer.
Well, that's what I was aiming for. I mean, that's why I could not understand why, you know, they were going to put the emphasis on production.
Right.
Not that there's anything wrong with production, dear friends out there, but you know, it is a university, and
And the feeling, if I remember at the time, was that in the community college here, they had a big production program, and had equipment stuff that we didn't have. And
I think you were dean then, weren't you? You remember all this awful time.
Right. Well, I was trying to bring memories back here, but so we eventually we didn't phase out production courses, obviously, because that's important to anyone who's in the business to know something about. But we phased out the major that emphasized just that and not the other aspects of broadcast journalism.
You know, it's hard to keep up technically now with the media and with broadcasting and telecasting, and I don't know what they're doing in TV production these days, if they're doing sight and sound productions like I used to do. But anyway, I don't know where they're getting their equipment either, if KMTV is not coming through, but anyway.
Well, and now with the digital era, and I guess we don't need to get into
no.
all of that, but
I was going to tell you that one of my other volunteer jobs is I am a ombudsman at the Ambassador Nursing Home, and I've talked to Deb Smith-Howell about trying to get...
Dr. Smith-Howell is the
chairman of the
chair
communication department now.
Right.
And there needs to be a communication unit developed for assisted living and nursing homes, because it's a bad problem between staff and residents and families. And I suggested to her if I could find a graduate assistant who would write to do a unit on that, that it might be a great research thing and a great need for, as more and more assisted living communities are developing and nursing homes, and communication is a big problem. And she agrees, she just hasn't found the right faculty member or the right student, but I do think it would offer a great chance for a student to do a good job, not write a thesis, but do this thing and maybe get grants, who knows. So anyway, I throw that in just because.
Yeah, well, that's just another one of your many community service activities, which goes way beyond that, actually.
Well, it's very rewarding to go there.
Oh, another service activity on campus that I wanted to didn't want to forget about is your involvement with sports, particularly women's sports.
Yes, the Lady Mavs. I was on the board for a while, and I belonged to the backboard bunch, the basketball thing. And in fact, at their last deal, I won a raffle, and I get to have 18 holes of golf with the women's basketball coach next spring. I don't know. I said to Sherry Mankenberg, "Is she good?" And she said, "Yeah, she's good." I said, "Oh." Anyway, I've been a strong supporter of Lady Mav things, or they just call them Mavs now. There's no ladies anymore. It's just Mavericks. Yeah.
I don't know whether that's good or bad, but I guess
well, who knows?
Yeah, I had an interesting discussion on that with Connie Clausen when she was part of this interview series.
Well, as I said, Jack, when you get down to me, you really run through.
I've been wanting to do that, to have this interview now for a long time.
Well,
and, it's only that last year I was incapacitated a bit with
you're looking wonderful.
Health problems. And, okay, well, let's see. I wanted to talk. Well, let's talk a little bit about some. We've talked about people that you've known here, and you've mentioned a lot of names, people that were your students. And we've talked about others too. We've talked about chancellors, let's spend some time talking about people you've known on the campus here: faculty, chancellors, other administrators, students, anything you want to.
Well, oh gosh, that's.
You have a long list of students.
I had a long list of students, and as I say, many of them got their start right here in this studio. Certainly Roseanne Shannon, who is news editor of Channel 9, 7, 9, whatever you want, KETV, got her start here. Colleen Williams, who is the anchor for the NBC owned and operated station in Los Angeles, came here. She said that taking that mass communication and the broadcasting courses got her out of home economics to broadcasting. So I feel good about that. And the campus has really grown and become quite beautiful now, I think. And I was really saddened at Neil Morganson's death, because I think he had a lot to do with beautifying the campus.
Yeah, he was director of of the
everything.
Physical plant
Yes,
department.
And of course we've had all the new buildings, and the residence halls are gorgeous. And if you we even have a South Campus now. Yeah,
that was tragic that he died at such a young age. He was a good friend, and I worked with him on a number of the buildings, the Durham Science Center and others. And he was. You're right. He did a great job.
Well, people that I've known and worked with for years: Mary Mudd, Rita Henry,
That's in those are student services.
With student services, and Gary Carrico, I've worked with him for many, many years,
He's
and
he's the business end of things.
I used to say that he was probably the chancellor's, and I don't know this, but he always brought in budget news, and that was never good news for the chancellor. So, but Gary is an old friend, and Larry Trussell is a friend.
And I've interviewed Larry in this series too. Yeah.
You haven't gotten Gary yet, huh? Not yet.
No, not yet.
Okay.
Maybe I'll wait till he retires, and then he'll feel freer to talk about things.
Well, Beth James over in Fine Arts, I still think of her as a good friend. And Roger Foltz is a friend in Fine Arts. I don't see him much anymore.
When we talk about these people, you need to identify them by their position.
He was head of the music department when I was there. And
Beth James
she was assistant. Bob Ritz, yes, she's Bob Ritz, who just lost his wife, and anyway, he was assistant dean. He was a dear person in Fine Arts. And I just thought of someone else, and now it slipped my mind who it was. But anyway, there have been lots, and Hugh Cowden, of course, was a gent, and I really liked working with him.
I interviewed Hugh in this series too.
And who else from community? There are not too many from community. From John Wanson Reed. As a matter of fact, when I left the university, I sold John my cap and gown. Oh. I used to, if I didn't go to commencement, I'd loan it to John.
John, of course, a professor of speech communication.
Yes, and now assistant or associate dean in arts
and sciences.
And Denny Fuss, who's a professor in communication. The two of them and I would that cap and gown went to every commencement.
John is a close friend. I hired him in the dean's office. Actually,
well, he's a good guy. Yeah. And let me think of who else that I can think of. Well, of course, Sherry Mankenberg and Connie. And
in the women's athletics.
In women's athletics.
And Sherry is
she's associate
director, the job that Connie had for so many years.
Yes.
And originally she was the
basketball coach. Right. Yes. And she is so busy. I think, what do we have? 23 sports or 14? Maybe it's 14. I don't know.
We're fortunate in having so many good people on this the staff of this university.
Yes. Well, it was a good place to work most of the time. there were good days and bad days, but we survived. And of course, Bob Bernier, I worked with him for years. Leon Millibar is the associate state director.
I don't know him.
Well, he's out of the College of Business, and he's been associate state director for many, many years. And he's a good friend, and I don't know if you would know any more of the people down there. Craig Hergott, who's, we have a technical training division, too, down at NBDC. And who else? B.J. Reed is a University of Missouri alum. We keep trying to get him to parties. He doesn't ever come, but anyway. So a lot of people out there that I have known, and people come up to me and say, I had you in class, and I said, well, did you learn anything? Yes, I'm doing so-and-so and so-and-so. I said, well, good. I said, was I hard? Yes. And I said, well, that's good. That's good. And Warren Franke, of course, and Carol Burnett, Mrs. Warren Franke, I knew her all those years in the Chancellor's.
Warren, of course, is now a retired professor of journalism. And I've interviewed him.
I'm sure, as I say, Jack, you were very down to the very last. Anyway.
No, the hard part is that I don't have enough time to get all the people as interviewees that I'd like to, because I can do about 2 a month.
Did you ever interview Bernie Colassa, who passed away?
No, I never did. That's a shame. I would have enjoyed. I never interviewed Neil Morganson. He was on my list too. Well, and in fact, I asked him a couple of times, and he said, "Oh no, you don't want to talk to me."
Well, Jim Vega deserves a lot of credit
I should interview Jim sometime. Yes,
and Bruce Baker. They're all friends.
Jim is the person who did the grounds part of and has done a marvelous job. He's still active in it.
Actually, Bruce Baker. I played in a golf tournament with Bruce Baker one time, and I see every time I see him, we lost all these balls out at Cape Heart or something. But do you remember when that Carl Jackson came on campus?
In the psychology department.
I can see I've struck a nerve, Jack. Well, I went to that workshop, innocent that I was. It was interesting. It was back in the, what would I say, touchy-feely workshop days, you know?
Well.
Oh, Fran Hurst was in it, and who else? Jenny Franks and Gene Freund, and anyway.
Well, that you were lucky.
It was a motivation workshop.
Single at that time because
well,
so many of the people that went there ended up divorced.
I have to tell you, a male graduate student actually started to hit on me. It was that kind of an unreal, you know. It was
yes.
a motivation workshop, and we were supposed to tell what was motivating us. And I was working hard on my PhD, so I didn't have a bit of problem. And I said to you were supposed to say it next to, ask somebody right next to you, and I asked it of this somebody whom I won't name because you know her, and she burst into tears, and I thought, oh gosh, what have I said? All I said was, what motivates you? And she, so it was very strange. And then come to find out, Carl Jackson didn't have his PhD.
Well, he was working on it.
Yes,
yeah,
but so was I, but he was...
We dropped him from the faculty because he never did complete it.
Yes, yes.
Well, I'm so glad you mentioned that because that's part of the history of the university that I don't remember having
I was trying to
seen discussed in a forum like this.
Well, I was trying to do everything I could to fit into university life, and I thought, well, it's a weekend motivation. It was 2 weekends, I think, and then we had to go over to his apartment and take our shoes off, and then we went out to somebody's house and leading people around blindfolded, and well, it was an interesting I thought, is this what the academic world is really like? Because we didn't have any of that.
Well, at that time, we were, the fad thing to do in psychology was this sensitivity training type stuff. And he came with good credentials from
And an attractive
Washington.
Young assistant, I might add.
Yeah,
Do you remember that?
Right.
She was blonde, I think, as I recall. Pretty funny looking back on it. I haven't thought of that in a long time. And you were you chairman of psychology?
I was chairman of the psychology department at that time, and so I succumbed to the insistence that we have a person on the faculty who had that kind of background.
He was at Washington U.
Washington University, right.
Carl Jackson. Well, I wonder whatever happened to him. Dear.
Those were, those were interesting times too. Well, we've been through a lot of interesting times together,
yes,
haven't we, Mary?
Oh, yes, we have. Yes, we have.
Some
whose names we don't mention because they're still on the faculty and still living, and we don't want any lawsuits, do we? No.
It's true. Another thing I might mention while we're talking about your campus activities was that, now, don't I remember some sort of an association you had with the Pan-Hellenic
Well, during my first years, you know, research, teaching, and service, and they were looking for a Pan-Hellenic advisor.
Tell me what that involved.
I don't really remember. It was going around and seeing that they behaved themselves in the rush parties, and Millie somebody, well, anyway, it wasn't very much of a job. I had been in a sorority briefly, but I didn't affiliate with it at the University of Missouri, but they needed somebody on paper, and I was it on paper, and I did whoever the dean of students was at that time, and I can't remember who it was. It wasn't Rich Hoover. Who was before him? Don Flaster? No.
No. Yeah. Why can't I? He left here to go to Oklahoma State University. Terrible. This is a senior moment I'm having here, right?
We have, yes. You're entitled, Jack.
But I know him very well, and I can picture him perfectly.
Well, anyway, I did that
He
for a
and
while.
Dr. Roskins Dr. Roskins brought him here from Kent
Garfinkel?
State.
No, not Garfinkel.
No, not Dean of Students. Terrible. Okay.
Dr. Roskins brought Bob Bernier here, too.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Dr. Roskins just got elected to the board of Conagra Foods, and I was at the shareholders meeting, and I called him after the next day, and I said, well, see, you got elected to the board. I said, now you watch out for my money. He said, oh, Mary, I'll certainly be glad to do that. So anyway, he's a great person.
Now, did you have much contact with him when you were on the campus here?
No.
Was he president of the university
well, he
then,
was
or?
about to go to Lincoln, I think. I had more contact with Garfinkel, and that was when we had the little library problem.
Yes.
See, we don't have time to go into all these things with the...
Well, we can take a minute to do that. That was an
Our
important
librarian
one.
was...
Herb Garfinkel, Dr. Garfinkel was Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, and in my opinion, a superb Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs.
Yes. Oh, I should mention Elaine Hess, who's a good friend of mine.
Yeah, and she's been, of course, interviewed in this series,
yes.
too.
But there was a problem with the library books being, or papers being taken out and copied someplace that the library director had been doing. So the faculty, it was when I was in the faculty senate, and we got onto it. And as a matter of fact, it reminds me, when I was president of the faculty senate, John Langan was vice president, so he's a friend too. And I enjoy, and Justin Stolen was
John Langan, of course, from the College of Education, who's currently head of the school board in Omaha, right?
Suffering a lot of, and I had Pat Wren in class, the one that had the big fight at the...
Oh, my goodness, yes.
Well, they go all the way.
And who was it else that you mentioned a second ago that I wanted to identify as well?
Justin.
Justin Stolen from the College of Business Administration.
Yes, he was president when I was vice president.
Yeah.
And so...
Justin, I have to tell you, because you got me started on this, and I've got to tell you about it. I have taken 4 trips now through the Grand Canyon on a raft. And you started me on that by telling me about your trip. And I thought of it because the last trip I took, Justin and his wife went along with us.
You've done 4.
Right.
Well, I only did 1.
But you got me interested in it to begin with.
It was quite a trip, an unforgettable vacation. I'm doing cruises now, not down the Grand Canyon, though.
Me too. I found out river cruises are wonderful. I have to talk to you about that.
I know I'm going to the Caribbean again in January.
Well, we've got 30 seconds or so left here. Is there anything you'd like to introduce? We haven't thought about talking about.
I probably have said too much now. I hope I won't have anybody's lawyer standing outside as we go. But since we're taping this on Friday the 13th, I don't know. You know, it's anyway.
Well, I guess we have to. I guess we really are through now. This is about the end of it. This has been. This has been Reflections in Time, a program that has been going for some time now. I want to thank you, our audience, for joining us in a visit with Professor Mary Williamson, longtime faculty member and administrator at the university. We've been taking a look at some of the history of UN Omaha as seen through the eyes of the history makers. And this is Jack Newton, inviting you to join us again in the series we call Reflections in Time.
Reflections in Time is made possible in part by support from the UNO Alumni Association, fostering a legacy of alumni giving since 1913.